Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 11. The drop bottle fell soundlessly to the ground, the empty lightweight enviroplastic container barely making an imprint on the sandy earth as it landed. Stalker swirled the water around a little in his mouth before swallowing the last few drops. He felt like he hadn't had a drink in days. His throat was dry and his lips were cracked, one of the more annoying side effects of prolonged time spent wearing EEA, the suit's ACS having a slightly drying effect on the skin of the wearer. Stalker breathed out slowly, the air passing over his lips producing a slight sting, but Stalker didn't mind. It reminded him that he was still alive. Not all were that lucky. The counterattack and retreat had cost the 21st Terra Nova 25 dead and 8 missing. Missing, that part annoyed Stalker, and he felt anger sharply rise in him at the thought. Somehow he felt like he had failed. He had failed to bring all his men home, dead or alive. No one should have been left behind. It was more than the honor code of the Terra Nova. It was his belief that his people deserved better than that. Despite the losses the 21st had taken, Stalker forced himself to accept that they had been unavoidable. He had replayed the events in his head over and over, questioning his every decision, but could find no obvious fault. No matter how he challenged his decisions, there was nothing that could have made a difference. It was war, people died. If they had tried to hold the line or go back for those who had fallen behind, the whole company would have been overrun. As it was, he and the 21st had been personally singled out for praise by Alpha One and the Immortal CEO, but a slap on the back wouldn't bring his men back. The 21st Terra Nova had spent the past several hours to the rear of the new front, rearming and refitting, the company and their vehicles being virtually out of ammunition and badly in need of a rest. Fortunately, they had been granted both. The new shortened front line allowed some of the more heavily engaged units to finally get some downtime, and fresh supplies had been brought down from orbit. For the moment the Deimos attacks had ground to a halt, artillery fire had ceased, and the skies remained relatively clear of Deimos aircraft. After the fighting, both sides had withdrawn to lick their respective wounds and plan their next moves. Stalker was gaining a new respect for his enemy. The Deimos were far from the mindless monsters they appeared. They used advanced equipment, more advanced than that used by the UEDF, and their warriors were as brave and determined as any opponent he had ever faced. Indeed, Stalker had to admit that it was only the luck and daring of the UEDF that had so far limited their success. As was so often the case with war, fortune, it seemed, favored the brave and the bold. Stalker, for the moment, let his exhaustion permeate his body as he leant on the battle-scarred hull of a 93rd Terra Nova Diamond scale, not bothering to fight it. While he relaxed, he watched over his company. His men were scattered around like corpses, their prone forms lying uncaringly in the dust. A few talked in softly muffled conversations, sharing a joke, news about a friend, or a story of home. A few were sitting on the motionless diamond scales, stripping their weapons to clear them of the dust and grime acquired from constant use. One roused himself to grab another ration pack from a nearby supply crate, his footfalls raising small clouds of fine swirling dust in the still air. The scene was surreal, belying the chaos of the recent fighting, as if the events they had so recently shared had never really happened and were only a distant memory. Stalker looked up at the dim, glowing ball of light that was the star of Proxima Centauri. As if in response, it suddenly flared brighter, and all around the gloom was chased away. The entire scene, previously dark and full of inky shadows, was lit up by a brilliant orangey-red light. Men sat a little straighter and looked around them, the true desolation of the terrain being starkly revealed. Then, as sudden as it had happened, like a cloud passing over the sun, the flare died and the gloomy dimness returned. Stalker knew that such flares in the system were common, but he couldn't help but feel that the star itself was reminding them that even here, where there seemed only darkness, light could still reach. Stalker flicked his eyes to his HUD, checking the time out of habit, despite the fact that the passage of hours meant little away from Earth. Old habits died hard. With a slight groan, Stalker forced his thoughts back to the war. His men had been resupplied and were getting the rest they needed, and for the moment his orders were simply to hold position. Despite his weariness, Stalker couldn't help but wonder what the hell Stratcom was thinking. So far, the 10 assault divisions were the only UEDF ground forces committed against the Deimos invasion of UEL space. The assault divisions were being bled white, try to hold back vastly superior enemy forces, and many were beginning to question why Earth had not yet sent any units to reinforce them. The UEDF's best forces were being committed with no support of any kind from the vast formations of the UE and UEF, and as far as Stalker was concerned, it was both a terrible waste of a valuable resource and a serious error of judgment. The assault divisions were incredibly powerful formations in their own right, but they were best employed in set-piece attacks or to defend critical points in defensive lines. Using them in open terrain like regular mechanized divisions, alone and unsupported, was madness. Surely Stratcom could see that it was much better to fight in the outer systems rather than hoarding their forces to defend Earth. Despite his frustration, Stalker could partly understand Stratcom's reluctance. Any move to weaken Earth's defenses would be political suicide and would run the risk that the Deimos would bypass or slip by the outer systems and attack Earth in strength. Stalker fumed. There had to be a better option. If the Deimos reached Earth, the assault divisions and their expertise would be critical. The UEA had a peacetime strength of over 200 divisions with several million soldiers, but there were only 10 assault divisions, consisting of a mere 200,000 elite assault troops. The skill and combat experience of an assault division could not be replaced once it was lost, and it was only their skill and the support and sacrifice of the various fleets that had saved them so far from total destruction. Stalker had talked to D about the situation following the retreat and had found out that TACCOM and Alpha One had already come to the same conclusions and that the issue was being taken to the highest levels. For now, all Stalker could do was to wait and hope that they were still alive by the time Stratcom and the politicians came to their senses. Stalker looked down at the lanky figure of Link lying alongside the Diamond Scales tracks. How the hell does he manage to fall asleep like that? Almost at that moment, someone else was feeling the effects of long hours. Not that it was a weakness he would ever allow his subordinates to see. General Jacob de Veers stifled a yawn without breaking his concentration. The session of the UEL Security Council had just begun, and the first speaker was presenting. The senator's report on the supply situation and progress of the mobilization of the reserves was of no immediate interest to de Veers, and he watched with detached patience. Soon the new Senator for Planetary Defense would move his first, and perhaps most important, motion, and de Veers would be there to see it. De Veers had been well aware of the situation at the various fronts before he had been approached directly by one of the leaders of the 10 assault divisions. The man had somehow accessed the head of the intelligence branch's personal secure link. De Veers had been more than a little surprised, and had made a note to investigate how such a gross breach of his personal security had occurred. He was not a man who tolerated such failures. Despite the breach of protocol, de Veers was a sharp enough political operator to know when to act and when to listen, and he gave the man the time to pass on his message. The assault division commander had calmly informed him that the fleet, assault, and marine commanders of the various fronts had been in contact, and they had all reached the conclusion that their respective positions were untenable without significant reinforcements, none of which seemed forthcoming. To this end, they had concluded that in 72 hours, despite firm orders to hold their ground from Stratcom, they would withdraw back to the inner defense perimeter to prevent the total destruction of their respective forces. De Veers had first heard of the discontent amongst the highest commands several days before and had known that the situation was coming to a head. De Veers had carefully considered his options. He appreciated the risk the officers were taking by confiding in him, their actions being tantamount to treason. They all knew that it was in his powers to detain and remove from command all the senior officers involved in the rebellion. But such an operation would be fraught with risks, and de Veers knew that their grievances were not without justification. Since the initial Deimos attack and the release of the knowledge to the Senate, de Veers had seen a crisis developing within the UEL government. Despite the obvious military sense in reinforcing the outer defense to weaken and, if possible, to hold, the enemy advanced short of Earth itself. The civilian leadership had balked at even the hint of reducing Earth's defenses. The assurances of several special committees and of the senior defense commanders that Earth could spare numerous divisions, and that it was unlikely that the Deimos would leave strong, undefeated forces in their rear to attack Earth, had fallen on deaf ears, with several key senators proving unmovable. The result had been a split in the Senate, with the faction supporting the reinforcement of the outer systems rallying around the senator for planetary defense, while the protectionists rallied around the formidable senator for labor and appropriations. The UEL chairman had treaded an initially cautious course, trying to mediate between the two factions, not wanting to have to revert to his executive powers to force a settlement. De Veers had direct access to the chairman and had informed him, along with the senator for planetary defense, of the information he had received and that there was no more time. The reaction had been one of shock, followed by quiet resignation. Despite the chairman's strong desire to preserve unity in the Senate, he would now have to use his powers to force the vote that had been delayed consistently by the political infighting. By calling a meeting of the UEL Security Council, the chairman could bypass both the High Council and the Senate and force a vote on the defense senator's motion to reinforce the outer defense perimeter. What no one knew, other than De Veers and the chairman, was that the orders had already been issued and that reinforcements totaling some 60 divisions were already on the move, even as the Security Council sat in session. Regardless of the outcome of the vote, the chairman's emergency executive powers ensured that he could order the forces deployed for some 60 days before his orders became accountable to the Senate. He now intended to use every one of those days, if necessary, regardless of the political cost. The chairman stating to De Veers only hours before that, "Any price I pay is nothing compared to that already being paid by the men and women at the front." De Veers was glad to see that he had judged his man correctly. The chairman would do what was necessary to protect Earth. That was good. A man willing to make sacrifices would be needed in the days and weeks ahead. De Veers sat a little straighter as the senator for planetary defense finally took the floor and began presenting his motion. When he had finished, the responses beginning with a long and passionate attack on the motion by the senator for labor and appropriations. De Veers had to admit he was persuasive, and he saw several of the undecided Security Council members nodding in agreement. When the various respondents had finished, the chairman rose to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, over a week ago there was a skirmish between our forces and the invaders in the space around Epsilon Eridani. It was only a small skirmish in a much larger war, and will undoubtedly be forgotten in the pages of history as unimportant. It was neither a vital strategic battle, nor a titanic clash of arms, just a remote place far from home where young men and women died." De Veers watched the room. There was icy silence. All attention was on the chairman as he paused and took a slow, deep breath. In the skirmish, the destroyer Scythian was lost with all hands as she covered the retreat of civilian transport ships carrying over 5,000 men, women, and children from the system's colonies. As a result of the sacrifice of the crew of the Scythian, all of the transports escaped, and the people made it safely to Earth. From the reports of those who were there, the Scythian held out against overwhelming enemy forces for some 25 minutes before she was beaten into submission and left dead in space. One final message was received from the Scythian. It was sent from the communications room by a junior communications officer. The time coding on the signal showed that it was sent some 6 minutes after the last communication from the ship's bridge. "I have that final message here. I believe it is something we here need to listen to, and I beg your indulgence while I read it." I quote, "The ship is out of control. The bridge was hit a few minutes ago, and I can't contact anyone in any other section of the ship. I know in my heart that everyone else is gone and that I am alone. I am not afraid. Instead, now at the end, I feel only a burning sense of pride. I am proud of the service we have done for Earth today. I don't regret that I am going to die, as I will die knowing that I did my duty with courage and honor. I pray that one day, when this terrible war is over, that those people safely at home with their families around them will spare a moment for me, and those like me who are brave enough to sacrifice everything for their freedom. I don't regret the price I have to pay. Victory is worth the sacrifice, and our deaths will ensure that others may live. My only regret is that I didn't get to spend more time with my daughter, and that I won't see her grow into the woman I know she will become. She isn't yet old enough to understand why her mommy can't come home this time. I charge whoever receives this to one day tell my darling Stephanie that her mom died doing what she loved, and that it was for her and all the other Stephanies out there. Stephanie, your mom loves you. Nothing is beyond you. Nothing is out of reach in life. Smile every day. Live and love, Stephanie, as I lived for and loved you. Mummy kisses you goodnight. The chairman's voice had started to crack by the end, and he paused to recover his composure. The council chamber was utterly silent. The breath caught in everyone's throat, and more than one eye glistened as the words sank in. That message was sent by Sarah Morgan. She was a single mother, her husband, Pilot Officer Peter Morgan, having died in a shuttle accident 2 years ago, a casualty of guarding the peace. Her daughter Stephanie is 6 and is staying with her grandparents. I personally delivered the message to the family yesterday and spoke to Stephanie. It was both the hardest and proudest thing I have ever had to do in my long career. Sarah is one of the oldest recorded names. Of Hebrew origin, it means princess. Our princess sacrificed everything for us, for our safety, and for all of us who inhabit this planet. Will we here remember her, and those like her who even now are giving everything they have for us? Or will we tell the families of those who are dying that they did so because we were too afraid to give them the help they so desperately needed? I will be voting for the motion. I pray that you will search your hearts and do what you think is right. We cannot let fear govern our choices. Sarah deserves better than that. They all do. As he sat down, some of members looked away, either unable to meet his gaze or to wipe tears from their eyes. De Veers watched as the support for the protectionists evaporated before his eyes. He smiled inwardly, his stony expression staying neutral. By the end of the day, Sarah Morgan would be a household name across the planet. The impact of the war had finally been brought home to the senators by Petty Officer Sarah Morgan's message, and that was good. It had been just what he had planned when he had written it. Stalker had never felt more elated than when the first units from Earth had arrived, the heavy transports delivering fresh troops and vehicles under heavy fighter escort. Over the next few days, several divisions arrived piecemeal, including their heavy air defense regiments. The airspace over the battle lines was quickly transformed, belonging to no one, with nothing being able to move without being quickly destroyed, the long-range missiles effectively closing the sky. The divisions also brought badly needed heavy long-range artillery, heavy tanks, and other essential equipment long since depleted from fleet stockpiles. A few ships also arrived to strengthen the fleet's tenuous grip on the system, but the battle in space continued to be a seesaw affair. Deimos ships were still getting ever-increasing numbers of forces to the surface despite several clashes that cost both sides dearly. Reconnaissance had also confirmed that even with the newly arriving divisions, the UEDF ground forces were still badly outnumbered, and it was fast becoming a race to see who could reinforce the fastest. With the air battle now limited to skirmishes far from the main lines and the terrain unsuitable for static defense, the battle now became one of maneuver, with the highly fluid front sweeping back and forth across the desert wastes. The Terra Nova and Immortals had finally been able to disengage from the front to regroup and re-equip. Losses had been heavy but sustainable, and some reinforcements had arrived from the division's home bases on Earth to partially make good the losses in personnel and equipment. Through several long, bitter engagements, the two assault divisions had held the line alone, and despite a few critical moments, their lines had never been decisively broken. The defense would go down as another glorious chapter in the divisional annals, with new heroes, both living and dead, being eternally remembered in the archives. Special mention would also go to the divisional Strider recon units who had worked miracles, using their speed to keep in check enemy flanking movements and to pin down the elusive Deimos Striders when they showed themselves. Stalker walked out of the divisional HQ, his Commander D and his second-in-command Link at his side, both his most trusted friends. They emerged into cool, gloomy air It was night on Proxima Externus, and a light breeze blew, dropping the temperature towards the freezing point. Stalker wondered what Dee wanted. He had grabbed Link and Stalker as the briefing broke up and asked them to accompany him, Stalker guessing it wasn't for a chat about old times. The trio walked out into the cold night air and away from the rows of silent vehicles and temporary buildings, kept warm by their EEA's atmosphere control systems. As they passed, they received a crisp salute from a sentry. Stalker and the others returned the salute to the mechanized infantry soldier. He didn't look a day over 18. We getting older, or are they getting younger? Link murmured. A bit of both, I think. Stalker glanced over at Dee, sensing weariness in his friend's voice. They stopped at the second Terra Nova CP, a command warthog, complete with fold-out shelter. Dee having borrowed the vehicle one of the arriving divisions, his issued command diamond scale having been destroyed by artillery fire in one of the prior battles. Dee motioned to them to sit, and, as one they sat on the fold-out benches, Dee taking a moment to set up a portable holo display. Dee broke the silence. All right, as I'm sure you have both guessed, this isn't a social meeting. We've got a game on. Alpha 1 himself passed this one down from the powers that be, and believe it or not, he thought you would be the right man for the job. Stalker leaned forward, surprised. He asked for me, specifically? Yep, seems he still remembers you from Mars, and after your recent actions, he thinks you can handle this. What's the game profile? We launching an offensive? Dee turned to Link. Not this time. The operations plan, calls for a small unit insertion deep within Deimos-held space, quick and quiet with a limited force. What's the target? Dee turned back to Stalker. High-priority intel, an intelligence branch substation on a large asteroid in the region of 61 Cygni b. The station is the hub for a network of stealthy probes stretching through several surrounding systems, which detect and monitor all passing vessels across a vast area. I wasn't aware we had a system like that in place. Neither was I till a few hours ago. This one is classified at the highest level and isn't to be recorded in the divisional archives. This one doesn't exist. Stalker and Link both were surprised by that. The divisional archives were already restricted, being only partially accessible to regimental commanders, with full access only granted to the divisional CO. The facility was activated when the system was evacuated, but something went wrong. The system is working perfectly, but it isn't transmitting data, just storing it. An intelligence branch wants the information in the hub's computers badly. Stalker and Link listened as their CO went into a detailed mission breakdown. The plan was ambitious and would require more than a little bit of luck to succeed. They would have to divert out into deep space to limit the possibility of detection before jumping close to their target and running in under normal propulsion. To aid in their mission, they would be inserting in a Swift-Foot-class assault transport that had been modified for covert operations. Stalker and Link would hand-pick 22 others from the 21st Terra Nova to be in the insertion group, making 2 groups of 12. One team being led by Stalker, while Link would head up the second. They would insert through a backup landing bay rather than the main platform, from where one team would secure the package while the second secured the evac route and protected the vulnerable landed transport. Sounds almost too easy, said Link with a straight face. Have I mentioned the complicated computer access controls and the heavy Deimos presence believed to be in the system? Ah, that's better. Wouldn't want to make it too survivable. When do we leave? Dee shook his head, and Stalker chuckled at his exasperation. All right, you two have some work to do. Your transport will be here in 6 hours. Select your team and gear up ASAP. Stalker stood to leave and was about to reply with some bravado when Dee interrupted him. And be careful, both of you. This one will be dangerous, and I do appreciate your commitment. I told Alpha 1 that he would have my best men on the job. Get in and get out. Make the Terra Nova proud. Stalker was surprised by the genuine thanks and concern in his voice and wasn't sure what to say. Link replying for both of them. Don't worry, boss. We'll deliver the goods. See you on the flip side. Stalker and Link spent the next hour going through and selecting their team, stripping the cream of the 21st Company. It was hard to pick men who excelled above and beyond, as everyone in the company was highly motivated and experienced. In the end, it came down to a handful who had done specialist training and skills that might come in handy, and then reinforcing them with men that Link and Stalker personally knew, most being veterans from Mars. Once they had the chosen men assembled, they took them aside and gave them a brief rundown of the mission, the men taking the news with cool professionalism. They then set about raiding the regimental stores, stocking up on anything and everything that might come in handy, from missile launchers and C6 charges to extra frag grenades. Despite the secrecy of the mission, the news that something was afoot spread fast, and soon rumors as only soldiers could tell were flying about the second Terra Nova Zeo. As 0 hour approached, the men assembled near a large flat boulder-free area, which served as the 2nd Regiment's landing zone. Exactly on time, the noise of an airborne engine could be heard, and a large dark shape descended from the starry sky. Stalker, recognizing it from examples he had seen parked at a testing facility the year before. The Swiftfoot S variant barely resembled the aircraft that had spawned it. The rugged looks of the standard Swiftfoot were replaced by a subtle curvature and smoothness. The Swiftfoot S had fully integrated stealth technology, as well as a reduced energy and heat signature. It had also been painted midnight black to blend into the darkness of space, and had its standard propulsion upgraded to multiple-use jump engines. The downside was a vastly reduced payload and passenger carrying capability, including losing the ability to deploy OAPs and a reduction in defensive systems and armor. The ship instead relying on speed and stealth for its survival. As Stalker watched the transport touch down in a cloud of dust, he approved of what he saw. It was unmistakably beautiful. Nice color. Must have known we were coming. Would look good with a Terra Nova roundel on the side. Stalker looked sideways at Link. You read my mind. Closed by the assembled men, were waiting patiently for his go-ahead. They didn't have long to wait. With a nod from Stalker, Link got the men moving. All right, let's move like we have a purpose. You're not being paid by the hour. Stalker stepped through the rear access ramp and was immediately struck by how cramped the interior was compared to the relatively spacious interior of the standard Swiftfoot. The Force's complement of 24 in crates of pilfered supplies, leaving them with little more than standing room. While Link saw to the men and equipment, Stalker headed up to the cockpit. As he reached the forward hatch, he saw a unit motto scrawled over the doorway. It read, "Hear no evil, see no evil. Speak no evil. 276 Squadron, the Shadows." The cockpit itself was as cramped as the rest of the transport, the crew of 3 consisting of 2 pilots seated side by side and a navigational officer seated at a console behind them. Stalker also noted a corner of the confined cockpit was equipped with a jury-rig cot. The original Swiftfoot was only designed for short-distance hauls. Clearly, crew and passenger comfort in the jump engine-equipped Swiftfoot S was an afterthought. After chatting with the pilot, Stalker plugged into the Swiftfoot's computer and downloaded the mission's intelligence package, the facility's blueprints and the flight plan data flowing up in his EEA's HUD. Just minutes later, the Swiftfoot lifted off in complete darkness, and then pirouetting effortlessly began to climb into orbit and its first jump point.